Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. So good to see you all again. Alrighty, as we get ready to dive into the workshop session with Miss Robyn, I'm going to ask that everybody turns on your cameras if you can. We would love to see your smiling faces. Hi, Miss Lisa. Hi, Ariel. Hi, Miss Barbara. Good to see y'all. Hi, Carissa. Alrighty, and then we're just going to go over a few items before she gets started. And just talk about our functions on the bottom of our Zoom screen. So you all have a mute button. That is the microphone. If you need to come off mute to ask a question, you can do so during this time. We ask that you raise your hand first if you have a question, and you can raise your hand under the reactions button on the bottom panel. If you click reactions, you see a button that says raise hand. And then once we notice that your hand is raised, we can do open questions as they come along. But if you do not want to come off mute and ask your question, you can feel free to type it in the chat box at any point. Ms. Robyn is not going to have a formal Q&A like we had with Dr. Sparrow yesterday. She is just going to go through with her workshop, and she will answer questions as they come. So as you have a question, just type it in the chat box for her, and she will be sure to get to it. And before we move to our workshop session, I just want to hear from you all again. So instead of a Mentimeter this time, we are just going to do it in the chat box. And so I want you to kind of type that aha moment that you had this morning with Ms. Robyn. If there's anything that stuck out to you during her session this morning, if you can, please type it in the chat box. All righty, let me get my chat box situated. Okay, any aha moments? Okay, Ms. Heather said, working in child welfare, I reference the inside, outside, in between all the time. Learn lessons about good stress and toxic stress, connections with trauma and separation, attachment and relationships, and the importance of these. We need to remember that the caregiver's brains are as important to consider as the child's. Yes, those are great, great moments from this morning. Thank you all for sharing. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Robyn.
Hello. Nice to see your faces this time. Welcome, welcome. So we're going to kind of take from the keynote that we just did and really build on that. And hopefully you'll leave here with some really practical ideas about what to do beyond just kind of like a paradigm shift in a way that you've already been exposed to. Believe it or not, like a paradigm shift and kind of seeing behaviors in a different way, that is a tool. And I actually think it's the most important tool. It doesn't feel as concrete as parents and like stressed out workers want. Like we want a something that we do. And I get that. And we're going to do lots of that this afternoon too, but really just the shift in how we see things is the most powerful tool that we have and that we can give to parents. So we are going to just kind of keep right on chugging along with, okay, so now what? We learned about the impact of trauma and toxic stress on the developing brain, very briefly. What do we do about it? People always ask me, well, can we fix this? Or can we, if babies don't get the co-regulation that we wish that they had when they were small, is there anything we can do about it now? And the answer is with 100%, yeah, absolutely, we can. That is why we would do the work that we do. And we are, just like somebody put in the chat, we're going to talk about the baby's brains and the little children's brains, but we're going to talk about the parents' brains too, because it is in some ways almost more important, because the children are with their caregivers way more than they're with us. And so if we can really, really help their caregivers, we are going to do leaps and bounds more support with this child's developing brain. I really want caregivers to feel empowered about how important they are, empowered that they are exactly what their child needs. And we can help them like really lean into that truth and feel confident and competent, because kids need parents who feel confident and competent. And I want parents to trust themselves more than they trust me eventually, that they really, really know their child and their baby and their little one, and that they're exactly who their little one needs. And I know that parents who also have histories of trauma and toxic stress, and my guess is, I don't know, what do y'all think? Like, if you had to guess on your caseloads, how many of the parents on your caseloads have their own histories of trauma and toxic stress? And that can be like overt abuse and neglect. It can be growing up in poverty. It can be like systemic social justice things like racism, belonging to some sort of marginalized or oppressed group, and the experience that has. What do you think? Like, would you say the majority of the parents that you work with? All of them? Yeah. That's sort of what I would have guessed, that like majority to all. And I also didn't want to make that assumption without asking you. So everything we just learned about the developing brain and trauma, toxic stress applies to the caregivers. It's just that the behaviors that we see are so differently. Like when toddlers have a sensitized stress response system, they, throw their food at the floor, chuck their blocks across the room, or, throw their whole body on the floor and scream and kick. When adults' sensitized stress response system kicks off, they do different things. Like, they have their own grown-up coping skills, or not, right? And without question, this comes out in how they parent, especially how they parent a child who is in need of soothing, right? Generally speaking, even struggling parents do an okay job when their child's also okay, right? It's when their child has a need, their child is stressed in some way, their child has some sort of behavioral problem, their child is seeking, that's when parents are really struggling. So if we can see the parents through that same lens, that can be so helpful, and also help us know how to help them. We want to teach parents how to have this X-ray vision, right? We learned about like seeing beneath behavior and looking at connection and regulation and felt safety. And we want to have parents develop that skill as well, and really be able to see like inside what's happening for their baby and their toddler and their preschooler, and then are there big kids too, right? I'm sure you have families who also have older children in the house as well, and respond to that. And in so many ways, especially for folks with their own histories of trauma, toxic stress, or for folks who are raised in extremely controlling, punitive, or actually the opposite as well, like extremely permissive, hands-off parenting. It is so counterintuitive to parent in this way with connection and co-regulation. And it's not because they're bad parents, it's because they have extremely sensitized stress response systems, just like their kids do. So the tiny little stress in the parent-child relationship, or little tiny stress that's presented by their child, or a little tiny stress in themselves with feeling like, I don't know what to do here, right? These tiny little stressors evoke huge responses from parents, just like it does for kids. So we can really help parents be able to see what's underneath the behavior and teach them, how to respond. And so by doing so, like really growing healthy brains. So let's talk a little bit at the beginning about reflective functioning, because that's the, I don't know, like the official word for X-ray vision goggles. I don't talk with parents about X-ray vision goggles. In fact, I train people on how to do the work that I do with parents. I train other professionals how to do that work. And I have a therapist right now who just ordered off of Amazon, like fake glasses. And she gives them to parents as like a way to be playful with this idea of like putting on a new lens and having this X-ray vision to be able to see what's underneath their kids' behaviors. So I think it's fun to talk about X-ray vision, but what we're really talking about is reflective functioning. So if reflective functioning is a new term for you, let's just define it right off the bat. So parental reflective functioning refers to the parent's or caregiver's capacity to envision his or her child as motivated by internal mental states, such as feelings, wishes, and desires. Right? So they're able to see that their behavior is the result of something happening on the inside. It also entails the caregiver's capacity to reflect on how his or her own internal mental experiences are impacting how they're seeing their child. Right. So it's like my husband and I we have been parenting for a long time. We have a 17-year-old. We've spent 4,000 billion hours in therapy. And plus I do this for a living. And so we have relatively high reflective functioning, right? Like we understand a lot about child development. I understand a lot about even the adolescent brain because of my work, right? And we've spent a lot of time and doing our own inner work to have some awareness of how our experiences and our own mental state in unfolding moments impacts how we see our kids. So for example, we have a snow day here in Michigan, and we live rurally and have a beast of a driveway. It's long, it's uphill, and it's curves. And so when we get a lot of snow, we have to tend to it right away, or we can't leave and nobody can get in. And so it's generally speaking a family chore, and actually generally speaking a chore we all enjoy, believe it or not. It's kind of fun to get bundled up. I mean, fun's maybe not exactly the right word, but it's not a dreaded task, is I guess my point. And my son was home from school today, and I was prepping for this, right? Like I'm speaking at a conference today. So I was exempt from clearing the driveway today. And my son, who's home from school today, at like 10:30 in the morning, a totally reasonable time, y'all, we're not talking about like 7 a.m. here, like 10:30 a.m. My husband lets him know, like, hey, it's time to start working on the driveway. And my 17-year-old son had a pretty typical 17-year-old reaction, right? Like, this is so stupid. Why do I have to do everything? Rah, 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 And my husband and I just sort of like looked at his response, because this happened over text, and we're like, this seems pretty appropriate for like a 17-year-old teenager, like pretty normal. We knew we didn't have to like worry about him refusing to do it. Like we just sort of ignored his little kind of teenage tantrum because he's a teenager. He had barely woken up. Like his brain's doing all sorts of fascinating things. Of course, he's going to have like a reaction. And so we were able to use our reflective functioning to see like what's really going on with that behavior, which just impacted our decision to just ignore it. Like, we just really didn't need to do anything but say like, we'll meet you in the driveway in a couple minutes. Okay. So you see how that, like, we were able to see underneath his behavior, as well as see our own like irritation at first, but then use our knowledge of like the developing teenager brain to just whatever, we'll meet you outside. That's reflective functioning. And we don't always have great reflective functioning. We get, dysregulated, like all parents do sometimes, but that particular moment is an example of good reflective functioning. So we know that reflective functioning is highly correlated with secure attachment. Parents who understand what's happening inside their babies, I mean, think of it like this: they really see their kids, right? They see their kids for who they really are, not for just what their behavior is. That's secure attachment, right? So high reflective functioning is highly correlated with secure attachment. Secure attachment is correlated with all sorts of good things. Like that's essentially what we want. Not just from an attachment perspective, but because secure attachment is correlated with like emotional attunement, flexibility, like all the things that are good, mental wellness correlated with secure attachment. So Fonagy has some research that looked at security and insecurity and attachment in mother-infant dyads, specifically at the difference between mothers that they had what they labeled depraved childhoods or histories, and mothers who didn't, as well as mothers with high or low reflective functioning. So that was sort of like the things they were looking at in this study. And what they learned was that mothers with histories that they considered depraved, but who had high reflective functioning, actually had a higher incidence of secure attachment with their kids than even the group of non-depraved moms who also had high reflective functioning. So this means a couple things. One, it means that there's actually potentially some kind of benefits to having had hard things happen to us, to being able to really see what's happening for other people and attuning to them and really like responding below the behavior. There seems to actually be ways in which that is helpful than folks who have had like very little adversity in their lives, but it needs to be paired with high reflective functioning. It needs to be paired with the ability to really see what's underneath the behavior. You've likely worked with families who have, a crying 8-month-old, and they talk about how that child hates them, or that child is, just out to get them. Like those are statements of very poor reflective functioning. They're not accurate. They're really describing that parent's inner world as opposed to the child's inner world. So we know that you can help parents grow their reflective functioning. So we can help parents put on their X-ray vision goggles, which helps them then parent with connection, co-regulation, and felt safety. If I see my child's crying as a reflection of the distress in their nervous system that needs to be soothed and not as bad behavior that needs to be punished, that changes how I respond. That allows me to respond with more connection and co-regulation. And that is then what's building the neural circuitry in the brain, like we talked about in the keynote. Remember like that I showed you a neuron and how we're really, parenting with connection and co-regulation is developing that myelin sheath around the neuronal axon. That's what we want to help parents do with their kids. Okay. So there's 3 ways we're going to talk about today that we can help parents develop increased reflective functioning. Okay. To increase our reflective functioning, parents need to, 1, experience it. Okay. They can also be taught it. Okay. So they need to experience us seeing below their behavior. We have to use our X-ray vision goggles with the parents. Then we can teach them what their child's behavior really means. And then they can be successful at it. So experiencing somebody being with us with their own reflective functioning. Like if I have the great luxury of being with somebody who has really good X-ray vision goggles and can see below my behavior, that grows my reflective functioning. Okay, that's actually kind of the number one way. I grow my reflective functioning by being in relationship with somebody who's using their reflective functioning with me. Okay, that's the experiencing part. I can also be taught to see below behavior. And then I really kind of solidified that muscle by being successful at it. So those are the three things we're going to do in the next little over an hour or so. So we'll go until 4:20. So as Jaira said, we are not going to stop at the end for Q&A. I would much rather just have your questions throughout. So I have the chat box open. You can ask questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask them. You get to choose. Okay, so experience it, learn it, succeed at it. Let's start with experience it. Okay, if we want parents to develop their X-ray vision, we have to have X-ray vision goggles with them. Right? We have to be able to see below their behavior, which does not mean we excuse it, condone it, don't set boundaries with it, give them the impression that their behavior is okay, right? It means that we use our X-ray vision, our reflective functioning, to make sense of what's going on inside of them that's leading to their behavior, okay? We actually know that when we understand behavior, we are much more likely to be able to set good, solid, compassionate boundaries. So one of the things that people are worried about when we focus on understanding behavior is that means we're excusing it. We're just going to let people get away with bad behavior. The research shows the exact opposite is true. When we understand what's driving behavior, we are so much better at setting compassionate boundaries, whatever that means in that moment. So we talked in the keynote, like if we believe that regulated, connected kids who feel safe and also know what to do are mostly behaving well, we can also believe that about their parents. Okay, and that is essentially the only work that I do at this point. I have two programs in my business, one that works directly with parents and one that teaches professionals how to work with parents. So I am all focused on working with parents and working with them through this lens as if we as the helper can see their behavior, and sometimes it's bad, as an indication that they're not regulated, they're not connected to themselves, they're not experiencing felt safety. One, that helps, just keeps us out of judgment of them, but it also kind of helps us get some better ideas about how we can help them. Okay, so can be a big paradigm shift, is regulated, connected kids, regulated, connected parents who feel safe and know what to do. We might have to teach them. Parent well. Okay. We know that struggling parents had almost certainly very difficult childhoods. And y'all told me that in the chat. Someone said all of your parents right now, we, believe have trauma and toxic stress in their history. And or now, right? Like you're not working with families that necessarily have histories of trauma and toxic stress. Their regular everyday life is full of trauma and toxic stress, right? And so this question that Perry and Winfrey ask in their book, What Happened to You, is the same thing we want to apply to their parents, right? But actually, in order for us to do that, we actually have to first be willing to do that with ourselves. So we kind of have to look in the mirror first, right? If we want to have X-ray vision goggles for parents, remember one of the key pieces of reflective functioning is that we understand how our own inner world is contributing to how we're seeing the world, right? We have to think about this for ourselves, okay? And this is normal, right? Like all of us see the world through the lens of kind of our own projections, our own beliefs, and our own values. So we're not doing anything wrong by having, our own projections, our own beliefs get in the way of kind of how we see their parents. Is perfectly normal, perfectly human. And at the same time, we need to, as much as possible, become aware of it. It's kind of like having reflective functioning for ourselves. I want to become aware of what's driving my thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And yes, in the chat, I mean, without question, the last 3 years have created stressors that were impossible to predict, right? And like most trauma and crisis, oftentimes we don't even begin to see the impact of it until the trauma or the crisis starts to kind of stabilize a little, right? Which is, for speaking specifically about the pandemic and what that's been like, it's starting to stabilize a little bit, generally speaking, culturally, right? Like I live in a place where, I mean, we hardly ever see masks. I mean, it's pretty, I live in an immune compromised family. So I wouldn't say life is totally back to normal, but for a lot of families, it feels kind of back to normal. That's when so much of like the fallout from the trauma and the crisis really can sometimes start to emerge. And then those of you, right, you're working with these kids who were born in the middle of a pandemic. And so you're seeing the like developmental impact of, you know, kids who didn't go to daycare when they, you know, often had that as a protective mechanism, or kids who had extremely stressed out parents, or all of these things. So, excuse me, this is great. So even recognizing these environmental pieces, like the impact of the pandemic, contributes to our reflective functioning, right? Like it contributes to our ability to see underneath their behavior, but also ours, right? So I'm just going to pop this lozenge in because I can feel my throat starting to get a little scratchy. We talked about this with regards to kids and of course parents, but let's think about it with regards to us. Our own reality, right? Including our thoughts and our judgments about others, and sometimes that includes our clients, are created by these two streams, the past and the now. So if we really, really want to develop this X-ray vision, we have to consider, right, what's in the stream of the past. What did we learn about people? What did we learn about behaviors? And especially, what have we learned about people who have behaviors that hurt kids? It is so easy, it's so totally normal to let our beliefs, you know, that we learned in the past kind of take over in the now and make it really hard to see what's actually truly happening. And this is so in the room, right, with parents who sometimes hurt their kids. Because what that brings up for us is huge. Like, we're very protective. Of course we are. And we need to be. Kids need to be protected with 100%. And it actually is better for the parents if we can see them as really struggling parents who really need our help because of their own impact of trauma and toxic stress. Just like it's harder for parents to see their kids' behavior for what it really is when they're dysregulated, it's harder for us to see the parents' behavior the more dysregulated we are, right? It's like the more dysregulated we are, the smaller our own window of tolerance is, so the more frustrated and that we are going to feel with the parents that we work with, right? Have a harder time like really being with them with compassion and co-regulation. So these are things to track in ourselves, right? So it's really, really important for us to explore what we believe, both consciously and consciously, about people who, for example, maybe use drugs and struggle to quit, right? If that's true of the parents that you work with, or parents who have mental illness that is impacting their parenting, especially parents who have mental illness that they're not seeking help for, right? What are our thoughts and feelings about those people, right? Parents who demonstrate what we'd call really harsh parenting, parents who hit or scream at their kids, right? Parents who seem to have really messed up priorities. I've done child welfare work. I've worked in hospital social work, so I've seen kids come to the ER because they've been hurt. I've worked with CPS. It's really easy. I mean, I can just think there's 1,000 times that language. Those parents have really messed up priorities, right? So where does that statement even comes from? Like, what are the beliefs that are underneath that statement? And what do we believe then about people who seem to have messed up priorities, right? Really, we just want to kind of examine our own beliefs about just what it means to be human and behavior in general. And I do have for free on my website masterclass and ebook, and I'll put it here. It's totally free. It talks about behavior and what behavior really is, and includes some of the things that from the keynote, and then it expands on some different kinds of things as well. And it's for parents, so professionals get a lot out of it, but parents can watch it as well. So it might be even a resource for you to give parents, but if not, for our own just examination of like, what do we believe behavior really is? And can we look at behavior through the lens of the nervous system as opposed to information about somebody's character, right? Barbara says that she's hearing about so many kids who are being diagnosed with autism because their behaviors seem so dysregulated, but they spent their earliest months and years with parents who have experienced toxic stress. I'm wondering about if that diagnosis is accurate. Yeah, I think those are great things for us to hold in curiosity, is how have their developmental experiences impacted their brain? How can we help their parents provide their kids with new developmental experiences while also being super neurodiversity affirming, right? That like a true diagnosis of autism isn't something we're trying to fix. But if we do have kids who are experiencing and like essentially developmentally delayed regulatory circuits, how can we help their parents with that? So these are great things. I don't have the answers for that, but I think those are really great things for us to be considering. Okay, so we want to examine our own beliefs, okay, with so much compassion towards ourselves about the things that are true for who we work with, right? Our beliefs about drug use and mental illness and poverty, behaviors that seem kind of like laziness and, that parents mix up priorities, harsh and critical parenting. And I think there's some reality to the fact that we all do this work for a good reason. We love these people. We love their parents. Even if you're not a social worker, you have a lot of social worker values in you, right? But what happens is when we get dysregulated, we revert back to like the kinds of things that we learned when we were little. And so it's okay to be a social worker or to do a social worky kind of job like y'all do, and acknowledge that you probably still have buried really deep some implicit bias about parents who are really struggling. We have to be honest with ourselves and have a lot of compassion with ourselves so that we can uncover some of this. Okay. So there's no shame here. We can really explore these parts of ourselves with a lot of curiosity and a lot of compassion for ourselves. Like, here's a story I'll tell you. When I was in graduate school 1 trillion years ago, I learned the words white privilege for the first time. Like, I grew up in a very, very white place, like probably 90% middle class white community. I went to graduate school before I'd ever heard the language white privilege. And I had such an averse reaction to learning about the concept of white privilege. This is a true story. I actually called whoever you call, I don't remember, maybe the registrar's office, to see about like dropping out of social work school. Like, I was like, can I get my money back still? Okay. So I have had to do a lot of work, which I obviously did not drop out, could not get my money back. I have had to do a lot of my own work, right? On being with my own implicit biases in order to be able to show up and work with families, right, in a way that allows me to truly see them. And that work is never done, right? That work is never, ever, ever done. So I continue to do that work all the time. So I share that story just to say, like, There's no shame, no blame here. We have to be really brave to look inward. So then to just get a little bit more practical. So yes, we have to do our own work because that's a part of reflective functioning, is knowing what we're bringing. But to get a little more practical, something that really helps grow reflective functioning in the parents you work with, because parents aren't really probably technically your clients, right? But you're interacting with them a lot. So using a lot of like I see you statements with them is a really key piece of helping them feel seen, which then does grow reflective functioning. So really, truly like saying the words, of course, a lot. Of course you feel that way. Of course you did that. Of course you spanked them. Of course you screamed at them. Of course you missed that appointment. And right, then go from there. Of course you felt like you didn't know what else to do, and that a spanking was the only thing that could come to mind. That makes perfect sense. I totally get how your brain had a big watchdog reaction to your child's behavior. And that's what happened. We also know that your child's behavior indicates that they need some help. So I'm wondering what we can do to help your brain feel a little bit more calm in those situations so that you can help your child with regulation instead of feeling like the only tool you have in your toolbox is to spank them, right? So we can do, of course, and also, right? I also use the words, that makes perfect sense. Like, I totally get why that would happen, or why you would do that, or why you would feel that way, or why you would say that. That makes perfect sense. And I also want to help you, right? So we can help them feel really, really, really seen, and also provide them a lot of structure and support about how to parent in a way that then helps their child feel really seen. Also, I'm sure you already do this, but just really look for those opportunities to see when they're doing great. And know that when you do that, part of what you're doing is seeing them, and that helps them grow their reflective functioning. Like, really see the hard work that they're doing. Really, really look for opportunities to be able to reflect back to them how much you see them. Very literally, changing how we see people changes people. And I won't get into all the neuroscience about it, but the resonance circuitry and like all the stuff that happens in our brain, and when we're in relationship with other people, changing how we see people changes people. Being able to see people through this lens of regulation and connection and felt safety, it changes us, and it changes them. Okay. So when you're ever feeling like, I don't know what to do, or I need tools, or I don't, when a parent does this, I don't know what to do. Well, that could be totally true. And also remind yourselves that simply showing up with this parent in a different way is a tool. It is a technique. And I also think about this too, parents who, people who behave in a way that we have to work really hard to like show up with compassion and curiosity towards them. They behave that way like in probably most parts of their life. And so most people see them as, I don't know what kind of words, difficult, hard to be with, like negative words. Most people in their life see them through the lens of probably some negativity because they're just seeing their behaviors. And that makes perfect sense. I get why that's happening. But we get this really cool privilege, I think, of being somebody who sees them differently, being somebody who sees them as, as precious of a human as their child is. And yes, somebody who's maybe really struggling like a lot, right? But both can be true, just like both is true in the kids that I work with, right? That they're preciously wonderful, amazing humans who also have really bad behavior. So that can be true in the parents as well. So when we work so hard to show up for our parents in this way, that is a tool. It really, truly is a tool. So what ultimately begins to happen is parents internalize us. Okay. Again, so the way the brain works and this really cool thing called the resonance circuitry in our mirror neurons, parents begin to internalize us in their mind. Like, have you ever had a parent say to you, sometimes I hear your voice in my head? Or something like, I was really struggling with my kid last week, but I paused and I thought to myself, what would Robyn do? And parents will sometimes say those things to me. And when we get to that place in treatment, that's when I know, like, we're really rocking and rolling, because they are internalizing me. They're keeping me with them, even when I'm not there. And I want them to internalize a me that thinks they're amazing, right? Not a me that's like annoyed at them or frustrated with them or whatever. I also can be compassionate with myself for having very normal human reactions to people who are very difficult to work with. But I also want to try so hard to be a person that they like turn to in their mind when they're struggling with their child. And I think we do this in like the tiny little micro moments of how we interact with them, like the way we say hello to them, or the way we say like, oh, I saw something while I was out and about in the world the other day and it made me think of you. Like the tiny little ways that we're building relationship with parents, even if it's the child, right, who is our like primary client, that we get to build a relationship with these parents and help them see themselves in a new way, right? And then when we say things to them like, oh my gosh, of course you felt that way. That makes perfect sense to me. I would have freaked out if my kid did that too, right? When we say things like that, they're starting to internalize that. Well, first of all, they're starting to internalize that they're not a terrible person. We might be one of the first people to ever be with them in that way. But they're also they're pulling that experience into their neural networks in a way that allows them to offer that to their children. Okay. So they hear us saying things like, of course, this behavior makes perfect sense. They get to be with us when our inner world is telling us, I can handle this, which sometimes is really hard. Sometimes the situations that we walk into certainly don't make us feel like I can handle this. But if we can, whenever possible, kind of embody that way of, I have no idea what I'm going to do here with this child or this family, but I'll figure it out. I can handle this. If we can do our jobs from that perspective, we will help parents begin to internalize us, and they will then internalize those beliefs in their parenting. And so this, of course, happens in stages. Like what might happen kind of eventually is we have a dad who's with a, cranky, impossible to soothe toddler. The days of toddlers, it's like, it feels like every 5 seconds they're melting down. Like the whole day is just a big giant meltdown, right? Maybe eventually that dad can be with that kid. And inside the dad's mind are thoughts like, of course he's melting down today. He didn't sleep hardly at all last night. Or he just got a vaccine. So of course he's having a hard day today. This makes perfect sense. Or had a medical procedure, or like all the reasons this child could have a more vulnerable nervous system this day. This is making perfect sense. Of course, I feel this way. Of course, I'm overwhelmed. Makes perfect sense. I'm overwhelmed. I can handle this. Right? Like to have a parent whose inner model is, I can handle this. Those parents parent in wildly different ways. right? Let me read this message in the chat. I have parents from my old center, was there for 3 years, still text me about remembering things I told them about how to be calm and how to redirect their upset child and ways to diffuse a fit before it gets bad. And their child throws themselves on the floor and hurts themselves. Yes, that is gold. When parents have gotten to the place where we live in their hearts and minds, right? Like you have people from your childhood who live in your hearts and minds, right? You probably have people who were really important when you were young, like at school, probably people in your young adult life, and people now who like live in your hearts and minds, and we hear them in our heads, right? So people tell me all the time, they ask themselves, what would Robyn do? And again, what I know from that is that means the regulatory experience is working, that they're pulling in the way I offer them regulation. That means they'll be able to give it out. So eventually we may have a dad who is like that, goes from looking like this, which is perfectly reasonable, overwhelmed. We're all going to have these parenting moments, to maybe being able to respond to their, child who needs soothing even more like this, right? So that's the goal here, to have internalized somebody was with me. Somebody saw me, but no, saw beneath my behaviors and was with me. I build that into my own like neural networks, my own neural circuitry, and now I can be like that with them. So let's pause here before we go on, just to see if there's any other thoughts, questions, curiosity, even just reflections, like sometimes just like what Megan did in the chat and told us about something. Those kinds of things also really help with learning. So the questions even too about, well, how do we do that with the kids that you're working with, given the setting that you're in? Anybody have any thoughts or questions arising? And we're still just we want the parents to experience it. We haven't taught them anything yet. They're just experiencing from us this kind of co-regulation way of being. I'm going to get another lozenge out here too. All right, cool. I really want you to think about this with the parents who don't seem very interested in learning any of the things you want to help them with. Right? The parents who either very overtly reject what you're offering them, or maybe a little more covertly, right? Like they're just too busy when you're with them to be present, or whatever, people do all sorts of things to like keep themselves out of relationship with us. And sometimes it's really overt, and sometimes they're like, no, I don't believe any of this, and I'm not going to do it, you say. And sometimes it's more subtle than that. The families where we really can start to feel like I can't help them, right? We start to feel a little helpless and hopeless, right? Because they won't kind of let us do our jobs. If we spend a lot of time in helplessness and hopelessness, we will quit. We'll burn out. We won't be very good at this work anymore. And eventually we'll quit. And that'll be terrible. So it's really important to me that we look for ways to stay out of helplessness and hopelessness. And this, for me, is one of the ways we can. That even when families are acting like we're not helping them at all, and we even leave their house being like, I'm not helping this parent. I don't know what to do. You're helping them by showing up and being with them in this way. Right? When they're yelling or they're arguing or they're expressing a lot of big feelings, whether it's about you or someone else, and be able to stay regulated, to be able to say those of courses, that makes perfect sense. I really get it. How can I help you? Right? That, and you never actually get to teach them anything. You're still teaching them something. And really, in many ways, it's the most important thing. And remembering that for me helps me stay out of that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. In the chat, Stephanie says, I think the biggest insight for me for the last few days has been that I carry trauma that could impact the work I'm doing at work, and how the trauma I hear about at work can be traumatizing for me at home. Yeah. And how this, as a first-time mom, seems like a big endless cycle. But learning like today has been so eye-opening. I'm so glad. It doesn't have to be an endless cycle. But when we don't really understand what's happening and we kind of like move through it all almost in this a little bit like mindless way, like we are like traumatized by what's happening at work, and then our nervous system is impacted, and then we bring that home and we don't really understand anything, and that comes out at home and in our parenting or with our partnerships. It doesn't have to be like that, right? Like we can't change how overwhelming and at times traumatic our job is, but we can be with ourselves and also with each other in a way that helps us really make sense of what's happening, so that then when we go home, right, we don't have to feel like we are, like Stephanie says, kind of stuck in this big endless cycle. And yeah, Stephanie, I mean, like I have a 17-year-old. I haven't even really thought much about parent, but of course, a lot of you are parenting little ones. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. When my kid was little, I worked CPS, child welfare, medical social work in the children's hospital. And yeah, really, really hard. And I'm not sure, Christine, if you meant to say, sometimes it can feel like we are not really helping. But without question, you are. Even just in the micro moment in which we greet somebody. So, especially when I'm working with folks who are kind of hard to be with, I think so much about what do they see on my face the first time we come into contact? Do they see a look of true like joy and I'm happy to be with you again? And I really work hard for that to be true. Like I want to be able to offer that authentically, because that's not what they're expecting, right? So and the easy clients are easy to do this with. We have to practice doing it with the harder ones. To really let the first time they see our face, think about it just like a baby. We want for little ones the first time, like when they see our faces, we want them to see a face of, you're so delightful. Think about that for their parents too. Okay, so experience it was 1, learn it was 2. Okay, so we had to teach parents this stuff. We had to teach parents about brain development, about core attachment needs. We have to help them decode behavior. So like in the keynote, right, we talked about those core attachment needs. And helping parents see their child's behavior through a new lens could be super helpful. Like when kids are really clingy and whiny and annoying, that's distress of their nervous system, right? That is, if we think about the still face experiment, right? That baby got kind of clingy and whiny at first. And so many of us learned that we shouldn't reward that kind of bad behavior. So we have to get out of thinking about it that way. It's not about rewarding it. It's about seeing the behavior for what it really is and meeting the behavior. And it can help to kind of talk through it too, right? Like to say, oh, your whining voice lets me know that you need me to pay attention to you. I am going to give you all of my attention right now, right? So that there's some information that starts to get exchanged about, I see you, right? I don't just hear your whining voice. I hear that your whining voice is in information about the distress in your nervous system, and you need me. That can actually help parents stay more regulated too, for them to sort of talk through it like that out loud, even to a really, really young child, and kind of help them stay regulated, right? But teach them these things. Teach them what whining looks like. Teach them when their child throws something at them that, yeah, of course we want to help our kids get what they need without throwing things at us. But also, what are they asking of us? Like, what's the distress? How can we help them? The attachment core needs, I think, can be really helpful to teach parents, that kids, babies, toddlers, my teenager has behaviors whose purpose is to seek, monitor, and maintain proximity, right? It's just that with my 17-year-old, we maintain proximity, kind of monitor proximity through like Snapchat, right? As opposed to how toddlers seek, monitor, and maintain proximity. So help parents like really decode these behaviors for the attachment needs that's underneath. Show them, when you show up for the first time and their child is whiny and hides behind their legs, teach them how good that is. It's like, oh, your child is so wise to not know. They don't know who I am. They don't know if I'm a safe person or not, right? They're really relying on you to decide if I'm a safe person or not. And I'll bet as time goes on and you and I develop a relationship, your child will start to feel less stress when I'm here, right? Like really teach them how to decode all of these behaviors. Also keeping in mind like the immense power we hold in people's lives, right? That like parents, when we're involved in parents' lives, probably one thing their parents are really interested in is proving up that they're not a bad parent, right? And if they have a toddler who hides behind their legs and cries every time you show up, they may feel some shame in that, or they may feel some, urgency to like teach their children to like, oh no, greet Miss Robyn with a smile and say hello, right? And we can say like, oh no, it makes perfect sense to me that your child is distressed. That's a sign of blah, blah, blah. So really teach them these things. Yeah. Also helps build language skills. Totally. That's outside my scope of practice for sure. But yes. Oh, great one, Linda. She says when they force them to give a hug. Yeah. Again, I think some of this is cultural. Some of this is how we were raised. And they were raised. Some of it, though, is the intense power differential that we hold, right? You are performing a role in these parents' lives that feels kind of like a social worker, and some of you are social workers, and especially folks who come from more marginalized or more oppressed backgrounds kind of equate social worker, helper people with CPS, child stealers, right? And so if we can really acknowledge our power differential and make sure that we're so clear that their child's reticence to be nice to us, let alone to like hug us, is not just okay behavior, but actually it's really good behavior. It really, really, really teach them all these things, because if a child has a, sensitized stress response system, and then their stress response system is activated because a stranger is there, and then their parents want them to like override their stress response system and give us a hug, that's like the opposite of what we want to help them with, right? We want to really help parents attune to and see and co-regulate the child's stress response system. So teaching them, right? And we saw at the very, very, very beginning that we can teach reflective functioning even to folks who have what the researchers at the time, I mean, that research was many, many decades old, called depraved histories. They can learn these things. Teach them about brain development, or I'm sorry, teach them about, I already did that. Teach them about how important they are. Right? I think it's easy to lose sight of how, because sometimes the parents interact with us in a way that can be really defensive. Underneath that almost always is shame. And coming along with shame is oftentimes the feeling of like, I'm a bad parent. I'm not even important in my child's life. And so we really want to point out moments that show how important they are to their child's life, and also just reinforce it ourselves, even when we're teaching them, or being so curious about what they're thinking and feeling about their kids' behaviors, right? Like really working with them in as much of a collaborative way as possible so that they can start to build their felt sense of competence and confidence. And teach them about the watchdog and possum pathways. I developed the language of owl, watchdog, and possum in the office, like in my decades of work with little children. Right? So it's essentially their language. And then I was able to see like what kids were doing and saying and playing in my office, and then take the science and like put them together and be like, these kids are actually teaching me the science, right? They're just teaching it through metaphor. I learned the science through neuroscientists. And so I can kind of like make the neuroscience and the play and the metaphor match up. And so that's all I did really with the owl, watchdog, and possum brain. And I know we didn't talk about that much, but in the webinar link I gave you, I'll put it again. And you can go and you can, if you haven't learned that from me already, you can learn it there. And again, it's for parents. So you could print out or give them, the ebook that goes along with it, or you can give them the link if they're able, if they have enough data on their phone to watch things, or, and I do actually have, at the very beginning of the keynote, Jaira talked about my book that's coming out. And the book is also all about owls, watchdogs, and possums. It's a parenting book. And so that'll be a resource for y'all as well, as far as how you could maybe use this model and teach it to parents. And then it could be a resource for parents directly as well. Teach them that the watchdog brain, the watchdog pathway, acts scary, but is scared, meaning not necessarily in like the fear way we talk about scared so often, right? But from the nervous system perspective of safe or not safe, right? It's coming from a place in the nervous system that's feeling not safe. And so it initiates that watchdog pathway. And actually, if you want to go learn all about it, I have like 4 different levels of watchdog. We can teach parents how to see like the different level of watchdog and help them decode their kids' behavior, because there's different ways to respond. Yeah. Barbara, yes. She says every time now I can see a parent who gives in to every tantrum as a person who is taking the possum pathway. Yes. Those parents cannot tolerate the stress in their child's nervous system. It's causing so much stress in theirs that they just collapse. Yes, they're not bad parents. And they do need help tolerating their child's distress and setting limits. That is still totally true. But also now we can see this from a lens of what's happening in their nervous system. That helps us, gives us some new ideas about how to help the parents, right? Like teach them to notice the distress, teach them to notice like, ooh, when your child is freaking out like that, what happens for you? Well, I'll bet you don't like that feeling at all. And you just want to make that feeling go away as fast as possible, right? Teach them all of that about their own body. And eventually we want parents to feel like they can handle it, right? That they can handle their child's distress. They don't have to give in. they can co-regulate through the distress without taking the possum pathway themselves, collapsing. Awesome. What often happens is, as parents, generally speaking, I start teaching parents about their kids. Every now and again, I will work with a parent who is super interested in learning about themselves. But generally speaking, when parents first come to me, they aren't that interested in learning about themselves. Even when they tell me they are. There's just too much shame. There's too much defensiveness. And so I start teaching all of this about their kids. And there comes a point where usually parents start to make the connection themselves. They're like, oh, my watchdog brain, or they start to make the connection themselves, which is so perfect because they've been hearing me talk about their child's distress and negative behaviors with compassion, with curiosity, with boundaries, but still with compassion and curiosity, right? And the watchdog pathway and the possum pathway. And if parents then can start to think about their own behaviors through that lens, we are so far ahead of the game because they already know that we're not judging the behavior. We're not judging it in their kids. We're not judging it in them. We're just coming at them with, compassion, curiosity, and yes, and some boundaries. This person says, my son's dad definitely goes into possum mode anytime our son throws a fit about not getting his way, and I try to boost him up and say, don't back down. He's going to keep throwing fits to get his way, and it still happens. Yeah. What is happening there is super common. It's a little less about teaching kids that if they throw fits, they can get their way, and more about the fact that they're not getting the co-regulation that they need. Right? So when a child throws a fit and the grown-up gives in, what's really happening there is the child's not getting the co-regulation they need to build their regulatory circuits. So they are going to keep throwing fits because they're not getting like the brain boosting they need to not be able to do that anymore. There is certainly an aspect of like cause and effect happening. Like they are learning, like, dad sets a limit, I throw a fit, I get what I want anyway. Like there's certainly cause and effect happening there for sure. But I think it can be a little more helpful in thinking about it through the lens of what they're not getting, which is they're not getting the co-regulation they need to grow the like distress tolerance in their nervous system so that they can be okay when they don't get what they want. Yeah, and that happens. Kids definitely have, so this person says their son doesn't act like that with them. Polar opposite. Yep. I mean, that's, first of all, totally normal, but also the reason that's normal is because of that cause and effect thing that I talked about, and because part of what's happening in the brain, this gets a little more complicated than what we're talking about today, but remember I said in the keynote, we talked about how we're internalizing one another. So when I'm with my dad, certain parts of my brain are online because I'm with my dad. When I'm with my mom, different parts of my brain are activated because I'm with my mom and because of my history and my memory networks and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why different behavior happens and why kids might seem a little more regulated with another. And they have the expectation of like, my mom can co-regulate me through my distress, whereas my dad can't, or whatever it is. That's just the example we're going with right now. Teaching parents about the concept of felt safety is super important because parents are always looking for the reasons why their kid is acting that way. And so often they'll say, there's no reason for that. There's always a reason, always. All behavior makes sense. There's always a reason. We might not ever be able to figure out exactly what it is, but oftentimes we're overlooking some things that could really cause a child's nervous system to shift from connection mode to protection mode. So we're not going to talk much about felt safety at all, just because of time purposes, but I do have a lot on my website. I have a podcast. I haven't even talked about that, but I have a podcast. There's a lot on my website for resources for parents. It's very specific. Felt safety is something I talk about a lot. So you can look at robyngobbel.com/felt safety. You can look at, I have another one that's called, I think it's called Connection or Protection. And learn even more about like the whole inside, outside, and in between thing that you could teach parents about, like what could be going on for them internally. Like I said, maybe they just got a shot. They're hungry. They're tired. They're just a child, tiny baby whose brain is developing. And sometimes that puts our nervous systems into chaos because so much is happening in the brain, right? So much could be happening in the environment that's causing the nervous system to feel a little out of whack. There could be something happening with parents that's helping us feel a little out of whack, right? So teach parents about the concept of felt safety so that they can get super curious and look at like what might be happening here that is causing this distress, right? Like maybe this little one is really hungry. I don't know. There's so many things that could result in the behavior of, they hit me with a car. I remember when my son was really little, like 2, maybe like this child's age, he took a toy car, and I don't know, I don't remember what happened, but I don't remember what instigated it, but he shoved it like in a friend's face and it hurt the child. Right. And so luckily I was in a mom group, which, for sure, it's not okay to hurt our friends. And so we, tended to the child and tended to my child. It's not okay to hurt our friends. And we could also stay curious about like, well, what was going on? Like with my kid, like, what was it happening there that would initiate, kind of a behavior like that? One, it helps me not judge myself as a parent, helps me not judge my kid. Also gives me some ideas about what can I do to help my kid. Teach them, like we said, the seeking, monitoring, and attempting to maintain proximity piece, right? Teach them what these behaviors are. These are good, normal, needed behaviors. We aren't aiming for kids who are never unhappy. Our child's distress is normal and appropriate. It doesn't mean we're bad as parents. It doesn't mean they're bad kids. It means that they're in distress. That's it. And they need our help. Same, some parents need help with the going out behavior. Some parents are kind of too energetically close to their kids, right? They're too intrusive physically or energetically, and they're really hovering, and they're not allowing their child to have these kind of go out into the world behaviors. And so teach them about those behaviors, help them see that their child really needs those experiences, right? This is how we're really building those brains. And the same, like when their child flees to them, when they have a need, they're not being a baby, they're not, whining, they're not whatever, some of the negative words we can attribute to that. They need help. Their regulatory circuits are doing exactly what they're designed to do, which is to seek help, right? When they're in danger or afraid. This doesn't mean we give them what they want. It means we co-regulate them, right? And I know you know this, but just some new ways to like really help teach parents this, like really teach them about how they're growing their child's brain, so that they can feel safe. I mean, like how many parents accuse you of being like, this happens to me, like the soft-hearted social worker, essentially. In some way, shape, or form, they just tell me that I'm that. Like, this is all woo-woo-y stuff. This is all like, sometimes it's the fact that I'm a woman gets thrown in there, or I'm a social worker, but all that kind of stuff gets thrown in there. And so we want to connect with parents with where they are. And so I think teaching them about the science can be really helpful. Ooh, I overlooked this comment, acts scary, but is scared, reminds me of a lot of tough conversations with dysregulated caregivers when environmental consequences trigger their own fight or flight. Right. So a toddler is suspended from childcare for biting, which means they have to take time off of work, potential lapse in childcare subsidy. Sometimes we just have to sit with the stuck. Oh, yes. Yes. Absolutely. And kids biting, slapping, pinching, everything essentially is connection seeking. So yeah. But yeah, really being able to grow our own capacity to sit with parents in the yuck and who are stuck and their very real terror of what will happen if they lose their job, lose their childcare subsidy. And so, of course, this parent has a big watchdog brain reaction to their child who is suspended from daycare for biting. Of course they do. Right. So yeah, I love that. Really seeing it all through that lens. Teach parents the attachment cycle. Show them this draw it out for them. Right. And there's a part of the attachment cycle that gets overlooked, which is the second part. Caregiver comes with similar energy. Okay. So distressed babies activate some sympathetic arousal in us as parents. Right. And we're like, oh my gosh, the baby's crying. And then we go to the baby, we pick the baby up and we start to soothe them. And so we start to soothe too, right? And so that matching part, parents sometimes think instead of screaming or spanking, instead they should try to stay calm. We don't need to stay calm. If your kid is about to put a rock through the TV, it makes a lot of sense that you're not feeling super calm about that. It's okay to have energy. And we know, and what we actually need for co-regulation to develop those co-regulatory circuits is that matched energy. We can have the matched energy without the dysregulation. Right? We can go to our kids with, oh my gosh, kind of energy, but without anger, without being totally having our own lid flipped, right? So that we can then soothe ourselves and then that soothes the baby. So responsive and attuned and co-regulating parenting is really truly like doing biceps curls for the stress response system. So if we're helping parents see how their child's behavior is a result of a sensitized stress response system, we can keep reminding them that this way of parenting them, because we want to go punitive. Most humans want to go punitive. Sometimes I still want to get punitive with my kid. But if I can pause and remember, no, that actually isn't what we're going for here, is to strengthen the stress response system. Right? And really help them see we are helping their kids' brains get built. And again, I have so many resources on my website that are free that you could share with parents directly, but could also just help you, talk with parents in a way. Okay, so before moving on to the final one, succeed at it, questions about that piece. So we started with have parents experience it, right? We want parents to experience reflective functioning and connected and co-regulated approaches because we're giving it to them. And then we can teach them about their kids' brains and seeing their behavior more accurately, and then give them tools for how to respond to their kids' behaviors. So questions, thoughts, comments arising. When I look at this last comment that came in from Heather, said, it's really hard to think about kids biting, slapping, pinching as being connection seeking. It is really hard to think about that. And it's especially hard to think about that if you're worried about losing your job or your childcare subsidy. And so always remember that the experience it comes before the teach it, right? And so you might have a parent whose lid is flipped too hard for you to help them see how the child's biting or whatever behavior it was that got them in trouble. Like ultimately, yeah, we would love to help parents see that behavior through a new lens. Yes. But make sure you don't go to that too fast, and make sure that we allow for the truth of the parent's lack of felt safety to be contributing a lot of dysregulation to their nervous system, right? Like these parents are experiencing things that certainly there's some very obvious things that I don't resonate with, right? Like I move through the world with a significant amount of privilege, none the least of which is, that I'm a white lady with some education in my background. And so if we can hold on to our own privileges and really see how these parents, like just day-to-day life, is contributing to their lack of felt safety, that could get in the way of them being able to, parent as responsively as we would like to help them. Right? But if we can help them, if we can hold it all in context in ourselves so that we stay out of judgment with them, that makes a huge difference for the first section we talked about, the experience it part. And it is difficult to stop and think about how you react as a parent in the moment. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I tell parents all the time about all the crappy things I do as a parent, right? That like, I'm not looking for perfection here. If we can increase the amount of time that we respond to our kids with this connection and co-regulation, like that's what I'm aiming for. Just a little tiny bit more, because it's really hard to be a parent. There's so many things to be stressed out about. There's so many things to be afraid of, like it is so hard. And I also think it's something that we can point out, which is like, the reality is I'm hardly in control of my behavior, right? Like if I'm stressed, my nervous system is, vulnerable that day. I'm a grown up with a lot of resources, and still sometimes I don't have very good behavior. So imagine what's happening for our kids. Of course, they're struggling behaviorally, right? And I think the more compassion we show our parents, the more compassion they're eventually able to show their kids. Yeah, and we didn't talk much about rupture repair today, but the rupture repair process is crucial in secure attachment. That like when we quote unquote mess up or we rupture, we have a hard time responding to our kids in the way that we really want to, we can come back with and repair that rupture, which I didn't talk about much here, but I do have tons of resources about rupture repair on my website. Okay, so when parents then get to the point, oh yeah, so Rhonda says, we sometimes lose control too. Of course we do. And like I said, I do have kind of a handful of stories that feel safe to me to disclose to families about times I've really, really screwed up. And then sometimes I'll laugh at them too and be like, and also these aren't even the worst stories because I'm not going to tell you those, right? Like I really want parents to know that like we're all just being humans together. And sometimes something happens with the families we work with that we lose control and need to repair with. And those can be really powerful moments too. Like if we can initiate a repair with a family we're working with, that could be so powerful, so powerful. Okay, so here we are in our final stage here. The final stage is helping parents notice when they're succeeding at it. So if we're getting to work side by side with parents, what we're doing is, maybe they're first kind of watching us be with their kids in a way that they would like to be with their kids eventually, right? And then maybe we're more just kind of present when when they kind of step in and respond to their child, right? Because we've all been in families' homes, and even related to nothing of what we're doing, the kid does something and parents need to respond, right? And so there's this way that it can kind of shift from us kind of being in charge and helping with some of the parenting to essentially what we're doing is then co-regulating the parent, right? And as we co-regulate them, they become more and more capable of co-regulating their child. And eventually they'll be able to do all of this themselves because they're holding us in their minds, just like we talked about. And they may even notice, like, oh, I thought of you, or they may not notice. They may just have their own increased regulatory capacities, which then is allowing that to be present for their child. And that is this ultimate goal, right? I mean, we're talking about healing brains with connection and co-regulation, but not just the kids, the grown-ups too. And even if they maybe aren't our identified patient, they are identified client, they get to get what we offer. And that really matters. It matters for them. Ultimately, it also matters for their child. And we get to delight in them and celebrate them and be with them, in all these successful ways. And not because we're infantilizing them by any means, but because that's how the brain changes. And as human beings, we really need to be seen. It really, really changes the brain. So let me show you where you can go to get more resources, and then I will close out the slideshow and see if there's any final questions. So I've said I have so many free resources. I have a podcast. I have an ebook about attachment. I have a webinar and ebook called "To Focus on the Nervous System to Change Behavior." Again, my primary purpose is educating parents. So these are resources designed for parents. Professionals certainly tell me they are learning a ton from them as well, but they're really written with the parents in mind. So they're written in that kind of language, and all of that's free. I have people tell me that they learned so much just from following me on social media. Some pretty regular poster on social media with practical tips and ideas about how to be with our kids in this way of connection, co-regulation, and felt safety. So again, of course, totally free. If you have parents who are slightly tech savvy, or for y'all, I have people were always asking me, like, you have so much free stuff, where do I start? And so I created a podcast feed that's like my 10 episodes of where I would have people start in order. And I called it literally Start Here. And so it's at robyngobbel.com/start here. It's the same 10 episodes you could find on my public podcast. It just organize them in a way that makes it really easy for people to go through them in a sequential way. And then I do have 2 programs in my business for parents and professionals who need even more support beyond what I offer for free. For parents, what I offer is an experience online called The Club. And for professionals, I offer a professional training program called Being With. And you can find out all about that on my website if you're interested. So we have just a couple moments left. What are your questions? Well, Jaira.
Well, I think this means you covered everything so well.
Or everybody's really ready to be done. Both. We'll go with both.
All righty, I'll just give a couple more moments to see if there's any questions that pop up. And then if not, we will move forward. Alrighty, Robin, I am going to go ahead and move forward if that's okay with you. First, I would like to just again give another big round of applause to Miss Robin. If you guys can unmute or use your reaction button to give her a huge round of applause. Thank you so much, Robin, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always such an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Absolutely. And as you all have seen, some of the resources that Robin has placed in the chat box and some of the ones that she showed us on the slides, we'll also compile those resources and send them out to you in an email as well so that you have them all in one central location, okay? All righty, and as we close out today, I'm just gonna share my screen again here quickly. And again, want to say thank you to all of our attendees for being with us over the past 2 days. I would say we've had an incredible 2 days together, and I hope that you have found this to be impactful and thought-provoking as well as valuable to your time. Thank you again for being with us. In order to provide feedback for this conference, you can scan the QR code that you now see on your screen. Or you can click the link that will be available in the chat box to complete your survey. Now, something different than what I said yesterday. So yesterday I said that CEUs will be immediately available. And so I'm going to change that today. CEUs will not be immediately available, but once you complete your survey via the QR code or with the link, and after our attendance verification, your CEUs will be emailed to you on March 31st, okay? The survey will be open until March 24th at 5 p.m., but if you would like to go ahead and complete it now so that you don't forget, please feel free to do so. As I said before, we'll be compiling and sharing resources both from Dr. Sparrow and from Ms. Robin's presentation today. We'll also have the slide note presentations attached to that, as well as the videos available for you to rewatch. The videos will be available for 2 weeks and are only for conference attendees. Again, want to give a very special thank you to our sponsors, United Way of Metropolitan Dallas Hopes Program, Help Me Grow North Texas, Kaplan Early Learning Company, and Texas Health and Human Services. Please be sure to visit our exhibit hall that features all of our sponsors and their amazing work that will be open until March 31st. Thank you again for sharing the last 2 days with us, and we look forward to connecting with you all again soon. I will leave the workshop open for just a little bit for those who are wanting to scan the QR code and utilize your survey. But if you are done with your survey, please feel free to head out at this time. We thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to connecting soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks
Robin.
to Jaira. Yeah, thanks for putting on this, and thanks everybody for the work that you do. You all do really, really important work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.